Okay, we'll get underway, everybody. Good morning and good evening, as the case may be, depending on your time zone. But welcome to another United States Study Center webinar. My name is Simon Jackman. I'm the CEO of the United States Study Center and Professor of Political Science at the University of Sydney, where the United States Study Center sits. And as we do for all our webinars, we begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the United States Study Center and the university stands, and that they are the Gadigal people, part of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we're joined by Anna Greenberg. Anna is managing partner at GQR, Greenberg, Quinlan, Rossiter, a fixture in the political consulting, survey research, servicing Democratic campaigns now for some time. A very established firm in that constellation of
40 years.
And Anna, of course, and I go back to, she suffered through my first efforts at being a political science professor at the University of Chicago as she was completing her PhD studies there. Longer ago than I will care to admit, to protect both Anna and myself. But then Anna went on to the Kennedy School, where she taught public opinion and survey research methodology. She's been the lead pollster, then didn't go down the academic track, very much attracted to the practical business of public opinion and survey research in the context of advising campaigns and Democratic candidates in particular, and many, many successful state gubernatorial campaigns under her belt. And every cycle is a busy cycle for Anna. And so we're especially delighted to have her with us. She came to Australia a couple of years ago as a guest of the United States Study Center and the University of Melbourne. We were so delighted to have Anna in country, where she appeared on Q&A. One evening as well. Yes. So if your memories are long, you might remember Anna being with us about 2 or 3 years ago it was now. And we're delighted to have Anna with us. Good evening to you, Anna, there in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it is evening here. I know it's morning there, so good morning to everybody from Australia who's watching. I'm ending my day.
Look, thank you so much for doing this. And look, I just want to begin. We're going to get into the state of the race, presidential, and in particular, given your work, down ballot in particular. But I just think there you are at home. And as we were chatting before we went live on air, you were alluding to the fact that you're running a major political consultancy, but you haven't been in the office now, Anna, for how long?
Almost 5 months.
Okay. And I'm just wondering, look, we're so privileged to have, guests from Washington from time to time. I'd like to take a couple of minutes for Australian audiences, particularly those who've signed up for a webinar with the United States Study Center. Can you just give us a sense of life on the ground there at the moment, Anna? Some of those reflections you were sharing with me about how life in the center of government of the United States of America, heading into 90 days till a presidential election. Just tell us a bit about what it's like there.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. In some ways, it's not that different. Both my husband and I work from home a lot, and my husband works almost entirely from home. And so not being in my actual office, isn't hugely different, and I can do almost everything online. But it is, and we're very privileged. Both my husband and I have our jobs. We haven't had our pay cut, so we're sort of the same while the economy collapses around us, which makes us very aware of our privilege. And our kids are here 24/7, playing a lot of Minecraft because there's no camps. And it's like everything is like baseball here. You think you can open it up and then you have to shut it right down. So people who opened up their sleepaway summer camps have had to shut it right down. They've opened up, they started baseball, and now they've had 2 separate teams with lots of coronavirus infections, and they have to delay those games. And so I personally don't feel that we can really do anything, and we don't do anything. We take walks around the neighborhood, we hike in the woods, you know, we eat, we cook a lot at home. We don't really do anything. We don't hang out with anybody except my sister, who's like in my pod here. And it's just a very surreal little bubble to be in. And I was mentioning to Simon before this started that, you know, my husband and I went for a hike in the Shenandoah Mountains, which is about 2 hours from here in Virginia. And we were on a fairly crowded path, and, you know, 90% of people were not wearing masks. There were crowds of people who looked like they were in college, like not a family, you know, related living, you know, 10 of them, no masks, going to swim in the waterfalls. And it was extremely stressful. Like, we were stressed, you know, it was not a relaxing hike. And then the next day we did a hike in Rock Creek Park, which is a huge national park that's within Washington, D.C. And 90% of people are wearing masks, and it wasn't stressful at all. And it just shows you the politics, you know, of this, that Democratic states are doing better than Republican states because Democratic governors are, you know, encouraging wearing masks and social distancing and being very careful about reopening, trying to do things like contact tracing, but frankly, we've given up as a country on dealing with it, which is really sad and depressing. And then you go someplace more rural and like nobody's wearing a mask, and it's like, well, I don't know anyone's got it, so, you know, whatever. And it's very weird. It's very weird. And at some point you realize like you can only really worry about keeping your own family safe. And then in my case, trying to elect people who actually maybe have a plan to deal with what's happening to our country.
I think it says something, Anna, to me at least, that American politics is so polarized that mask wearing has become, you know, you can guess someone's partisanship from whether they're wearing a mask or not.
Everything. It's not just masks. It's, do you think schools should reopen in person? Totally partisan.
Right.
65% of Republicans think we should reopen in person full time. 65% of Democrats say, no, we should do 100% online learning. I mean, any question about it, you know, whether it's masks or schools or reopening the economy, it's all partisan. All partisan. But I mean, it's interesting, like you can actually do an analysis of states with governors who are Democrats and states with governors who are Republicans, and you actually can see that the states with Democratic governors are doing better. Not universally, California's got big problems, but
yep.
You know, generally speaking, blue states are doing better because Democratic governors are actually trying to do, I mean, it's hard because there's no national strategy and there's no national effort to get people, you know, PPEs, or, you know, there's no strategy, but at least the states themselves are trying to do the right thing.
I'll get to another question in a minute. I just want to remind everybody listening, you can submit questions live. We do curate, those are fed up to us. I'm definitely going to leave time to take questions from the floor, the virtual floor, as it were, around about the bottom of the hour. We'll flip to your questions for Anna. So feel free to type those into the Q&A box in the Zoom window. But look, Anna, from this distance, it certainly looks like this election is all about COVID, or certainly from the Democratic side, that you want the election to be about COVID. If you're anyone from Joe Biden on down, any other Democratic candidate, I would imagine. And on the other hand, though, the counter narrative, if you're the president and his campaign, it seems like anything you can do to move the conversation away from COVID, and if you can't, then away from culpability for COVID, everything to challenging the legitimacy of the election, and sort of managing the 90-odd media cycles between now and election day, looking for issues that either distract or ideally even wedge, and hence the law and order play, perhaps. As a campaign professional, Anna, have I got that right, or is there anything you would want to sort of contradict that or challenge that? Or
well, I mean, when you say it's all about COVID for Democrats, it's all about COVID for everybody. I mean, in other words, like there isn't, you know, sometimes someone who works for me will write me a poll draft and I'll get it, and it's like, no, this is from 2018. Like, you know, I had a focus group respondent say something that it's COVID's world, we just live in it. And so the idea that you would even write a poll draft that wasn't acknowledging sort of throughout the entire survey the reality that we're living in right now. So every American is living in COVID. So it's not like Democrats wanted to be out COVID. This Democrat would be more than happy if we did not have COVID. I know you weren't suggesting that, but I'm just saying, but for sure. And there's no other issue, because it obviously cascades to economy and,
right.
So it's health. And I mean, what more is there? You have your health, you do or don't have your health, or you do or don't have money. Like those are the only two issues, right?
Right.
That being said, you cannot underestimate what's happened with the Black Lives Matter protests and the role that that's playing too. And it's independent, but not independent. I mean, it's independent from COVID in the sense that it's obviously about policing and, long-standing police violence against people of color. And so it's, and I'm not sure why George Floyd, sparked a movement when Ferguson didn't, or Eric Gardner didn't, right? Like, I don't know why that, or Trayvon Martin, but it did. But I think it's partly because there's so much anger about the president's divisiveness and racism and sort of sowing division as a way to get reelected, and in which he has doubled and tripled down on, socialism, China, law and order. I mean, it's all very the same thing. So that's happening too, but it's not unrelated to COVID, honestly, because there's so much anger about this president that kind of infuses it. So yeah, it's all COVID all the time. And, I think that what you see in Trump's numbers, the vote, job performance, what I hear in focus groups is this just despair about the fact that there's no national leadership, and people, the uncertainty that people are living in, including me, but like I have a job, right? But include everybody is so stressful. And I think the stress that people are living in here around not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing there's a plan, not knowing there's a future. And it's a moment that cries out for national leadership and a vision and a comforter. And what we have instead is someone who is sending secret police to Portland and throwing people in vans. And you know what I'm saying? Like, we have the opposite of that. And I think that is the problem for Trump, and is the problem for the Republicans. He is an anchor around their neck. They hooked themselves to him from day one, and certainly once he won the primary in 2016. And they can't separate themselves now. There's like no possibility of separating themselves. So every election's nationalized. Almost every poll I do, the presidential vote's identical to the Senate vote, is identical to the congressional vote.
Okay.
Like, you can't separate any of it.
Right. And I just want to pick up on something you said there. One thing I've learned from hanging out with really great political consultants, your reference there to the emotional states of voters. And as you know, there's a lot of political science that wants to talk about other things that are in voters' heads, and the emotional states of voters are something that professionally is just not something I was trained to, not part of my sort of training. But
you're a numbers guy, Simon.
Well, but you can measure emotions, and that's what I want to get to, Anna. You mentioned the focus groups a couple of times, this feeling of despair you alluded to. How is that, in a way that probably isn't coming through in a conventional survey, but just talk to us about how important that's going to be in the election, and perhaps on the other side as well. The emotional appeals that are so important in the American system, where voting is not compulsory. So why emotions play perhaps a bigger role in American politics than they might in, say, Australian politics. Could you just give us a sense of how you see that coming through in the focus group work or other forms of data you're collecting, and how it's translating the campaign strategy?
Well, I actually think it's hard to measure emotion, like someone self-reporting over the phone to someone, but I think focus groups are very revealing. I think the emotion that was sparked by Donald Trump's election was significant. The Women's March pre-George Floyd was probably the largest single day demonstration in American history. We can't count. So, there's some historical events we don't know, but there's, I think, a fair amount of academic consensus that the largest single-day demonstration in American history, and that was totally organic, ground up, not organized. I mean, ultimately groups got involved, but it did not come, there was no top-down. Washington said, let's do a march. And 1 million people came to Washington, D.C., 1 million. And that emotion, women woke up and said, I want to run for office. I have members of Congress right now who I helped elect who literally woke up around the Women's March, said, I'm running for Congress, right? And now they're in Congress. So I don't think this emotion is new. And I think you've seen it then in 2018 with, everything that happened, fundraising, activism, turnout. There were places in the United States where turnout almost matched presidential turnout or matched presidential turnout. And there are primaries in 2020 that are matching presidential turnout. So leave aside COVID. The emotions are there anyway.
Right. You
layer COVID on, and you've got folks who are less political, maybe more conservative, who are really upset, and it may not be a kind of anger march on the street, but they're like, okay, I thought Trump was okay because he was a good businessman. He created jobs. He said what he said he was going to do. He cracked down on immigration, and he's strong and he's in control and he's getting stuff done. And now, like, what is he doing? If they're not crazy conspiracy hoax people, right? I'm talking about, that chunk. And so that's where I think the emotion really kicks in, is that the emotion was already there with Democrats, and you saw it for the last 3.5 years. But where it's really significant is with people who were never activated before. And, I don't think, turnout, like if you were to apply the percentage increase between 2014 and 2018 to the presidential, it's actually not possible for that many people to turn out.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
I do.
We're going to see the biggest turnout. I know we don't have compulsory voting, but it's going to be like, now we can get into all the vote by mail and fraud.
Yeah, gotcha. We might get to that later.
So I'm just saying, like, the emotion's been there for some time.
Okay.
And it's now spread.
Is it a driver?
People are angry and upset.
Are you seeing flips? People that voted Republican in 2016 are saying, I can't do it. Or even lifelong Republicans, oh wow, that was I made the wrong bet in 2016. Is that coming through clear? And
yeah, but it actually happened between 2016 and 2018.
18,
so there's really good, catalyst. There's very good analysis by, whatever. You guys don't need to know what the organization is. Very, very, very reputable good research that shows that the shift between 16 and 18 was much less about turnout, because actually Republicans turned out at very high numbers, as did Democrats, and it was people switching. So they were either third party, they were Johnson or Stein voters in 16 who voted for Democrats, or they were Trump voters who voted for Democrats, or they were people who only voted in presidentials and maybe voted for Clinton but didn't vote in midterms before. So that they estimate about 85% of the change between 16 and 18 was people changing their behavior, as opposed to like this group turned out more than other groups. There was a little of it, but And so that already happened. And so the suburbs have just, gone completely Democratic. But there was also shifts in rural areas. People don't report on it because we didn't pick up seats in rural places. But there was actually a shift in rural. It's if you're starting at 30% and you go to 37, it doesn't change the outcome of that election, but that's still a big shift to Democrats, even in rural areas.
Yeah.
So a lot of that shifting already happened. It predated this. But what I do think now with COVID and the failure of this president and his, complicit Republicans, is for people who are sort of like, I like what he's done. I don't like him, but I kind of like what he's done, raises real questions for him. And especially among, I would say, college-educated men are a group that historically, they voted overwhelmingly for Mitt Romney in 12.
Yep.
And Trump won them in 2016, but Democrats broke even with them in 2018. And I'm working in places where we're winning college-educated men by 5 or 10 points. It's like unimaginable. Democrats never talk about men.
Right.
We never talk about men voters. We only talk about women voters.
Right. Wow. Look, I've got to ask, we had a fantastic webinar. Jen Lawless.
I do.
Yes. So Jen joined us for a webinar on the beat pick a couple of weeks ago, which was terrific. And I thought we'd have an announcement by now. So let's quickly if you don't, while I've got you, I've got
Oh, big pick is VP. I was like, I didn't know, is she having a baby? Like, I didn't know what you're talking about. Anyway, sorry.
Sorry. And I'm just wondering, look, we could get into, who might be the likely pick, and why don't we come back to that? But let me ask with a bigger question. In this kind of environment, does it matter that much? Are Dems just so riled up, and a lot of people riled up in general, on both sides, frankly, that it's this level of emotion in particular you're alluding to, is going to take some of the mobilizing potential of the Veep pick. It's not about mobilizing potential this time necessarily. I'm just wondering strategically, just given everything else that's going on in the cycle, what's the strategic logic behind one particular pick over another at this point in your view?
I don't think it's about mobilization. Turnout. I just worked in the Colorado primary. As many people turned out in the Senate primary as turned out in the presidential primary. Like, right. People are motivated. Right. Democrats are motivated.
Right.
I think this is a very consequential choice, probably more than, in my history. I'm sure there are times in political history which I don't know very well, like pre-1960, when it mattered a lot who the VP candidate was. But certainly in my lifetime, it's never mattered as much. And it's because the Republicans have done sort of a masterful job of sort of through both mainstream, Trump tweets it all the time, but also through social media, in sort of convincing a lot of people that Biden has dementia, or he's going to have a stroke, or, that he's not going to serve out his 4 years. And so what happens is the VP pick, becomes like, this person could be president. Right. And so I would not want to be Joe Biden and have to pick this, because whichever woman he picks will be eviscerated.
Yeah.
And because you have to disqualify her. Normally no one pays attention to me. Palin. Actually, Palin's not a bad example of a hugely consequential choice for VP. Like, Palin hurt McCain, right?
In the long run.
And yeah, in the long run, she hurt McCain, Yeah. And I'm certain, it's overdetermined that Obama would have won that election. So I don't want to suggest in any way that Palin was determinative in some way, but if you thought about, like, if McCain died, would you want Sarah Palin to be the president? And, over time, people became less and less enamored with her. So point. I don't envy him this decision, because that's what it's going to be about. It's about, can we further disqualify Joe Biden by disqualifying his VP pick and say, it's too dangerous for you to vote for him? Because it's not just a vote for Joe Biden, it's a vote for this woman X who is going to do Y, like whatever it is. So I'm like, how long can you delay?
Well, I hear you on that. Like, and also this earlier talk of, we're going to pre-announce cabinet positions and put out slabs of our policy. I'm like, again, the rational choice trained political scientist going, no, you don't have to do any of that.
No.
the other side have dug themselves. Anyway, hey, so with that in mind, where do you think this pick is likely to land? Now, Kamala Harris is probably the first name that comes to mind. Part of me, I'm just wondering, are expectations so high that it has to be a woman of color? And part of me is thinking, I don't know that it needs. I'm very interested in your take, Anna, on, given what you just said, where the pick might land.
First of all, I have no idea.
Okay.
So
no, fair enough.
I have no idea. I think there's going to be, and especially because women candidates are judged differently than men are. So there's going to have to be a minimum level of kind of experience and gravitas that, that this, and it's a double standard. Obama didn't have very much experience when he was elected president, and Trump had no experience, in government. So it's a double standard, but I think that it would be hard to pick somebody who's had 4 years in Congress, right? A woman, because I think that she will be undermined by. So there has to be some kind of gravitas in standing, I think. And so that would be, and it happens all the time in races I'm working on where we have to like meet some threshold of qualification to have people actually hear what she has to say.
You're saying women candidates face a special burden in that regard. Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondered. Yeah.
I mean, I worked for a candidate who's a pediatrician, and if a male pediatrician ran, it's like he's God. He takes care of children. Oh my God. When she ran, they're like, she looks like she gives out lollipops. Okay. Is she really a doctor? Like someone said that. Is she really a doctor? I mean, you just like it's you're behind the glass and you're like, what? So there's that piece. And then I think it's hard not to pick a person of color. I just think with what's happening with kind of the racial justice movement, and I think some of the problems that the Democratic Party has around representation, and it's not just representation in elective office, it's representation at every single level of the Democratic Party, is very white. And I think, so I have no idea, but I think that there's good reason to pick a person of color to be on the ticket.
If it's not about mobilization though, what's it about? I mean, is it just the historical significance of this moment versus cold, hard?
It's not about mobilization, strategy? It's about demobilization. It's like because Biden, surprisingly, is not that well defined. Like people have a very hard time saying anything he's done, right? And say to you like, well, he was Obama's VP for 8 years, and you'd think like they'd have something to say about him substantively, but they don't really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, VPs don't generally have independent.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I doubt anyone when Gore ran for president knew what he'd done. So it's not a critique of Biden. It's just true. And so, and then there's been, like disinformation and propaganda through both nefarious actors and the Republican Party itself is real. And I hear a lot of things in focus groups about Biden that aren't true, but they clearly are being disseminated. And so I think, the wrong pick for VP some lower propensity voters who it's an effort to, it's ridiculously hard to register and vote here. And now with COVID, it's even harder.
But why
Maybe they just don't bother. So it's not mobilization in the sense of like, we need it for high turnout. We're going to have high turnout.
Right.
But there's some group of low propensity voters who say like,
Okay.
There's some old white guy that I don't know anything about, but maybe he's a sexual harasser and, now there's another person on the ticket who I don't know anything about them. And am I going to get up and go register to, I don't think Australians know how hard it is to vote in this country. It is not easy to vote.
So, I just want a last question on this. So why does that say to you a woman of color as opposed to a white woman?
Well, the Democratic Party over time has become more racially liberal, and actually the group that shifted the moat are white Democrats. So a commitment to racial justice is actually really important for younger white voters.
Got it.
This is, and I'm sure you've seen the ANES data.
Yep.
On the percent of white Democrats who call themselves liberal and their movement on all kinds of racial attitude, no questions. So it is about people of color as voters, but also particularly for like younger who might vote for Bernie Sanders or Gary Johnson, like it matters.
So kind of in the same way that I remember the Democratic primary in 2008, where supporting Obama for a white people on college campuses, overt expressions of your support for Obama were, you were down with the program in a way that, okay. And really speaking to that constituency that Obama mobilized. His campaign was
It's broader than that though. Since Trump got elected, there has been a shift. And people who might have been like independent, sometimes vote Republican, would vote for a moderate Republican for Congress, but then vote for Obama. There has been a shift because of how overtly racist Trump, it's not like the racism didn't exist, but his overt racism and his empowering of racist movements and his normalizing of racism has had, it has mobilized people on his side, but it has mobilized
counter
people on the other
got it.
side. And it's not performative. There are a large number of people who feel very committed to vote against Trump, independent of COVID, because of the way he has fomented racial division in this country.
That's really, I'm glad we interrogated that, Anna. That's really helpful, and something me and my team here are gonna go look at some recent data we've been collecting on that. So let's move on. We've talked a little bit about some of the demographics that are moving. I want to jump down to a question that I get asked all the time, and you must too, Anna. Can we trust the polling this time around? Just last night, I was looking at the misses in state level poll averaging in 16, and there are colossal misses, like underestimating Trump's strength in swing states, averaging across the public polling, 5, 6, 7-point misses in places where Trump ended up winning or almost won. Has polling improved since 16? And, these massive leads we're seeing certainly nationally and in some swing states for Biden at the moment, are they believable in your view?
Well, I mean, we've learned a lot about what went wrong in 2016, and we fixed a lot of it. And, I think the consensus is, now you follow this as closely as anybody, so thanks for asking me, but you know as much as I do about this. You do. Is that the polling really underestimated the number of people who have a college education in this country. And that's partly because, certain polls that we use, like exit polls, to help us figure out what the electorate looks like, overrepresent college educated people more likely to stop and take an exit poll. And so pollsters have been thinking about, like, what percentage of, Michigan is college educated? Oh, it's X percent. But that's wrong. And so when you have close elections, then like they were in Michigan and in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, that getting that wrong matters a lot. And actually, we had a precursor for this in Kentucky in 2015 in that governor's race, where a similar dynamic, the polls were all wrong. So, what happened is, my understanding is, if you go back and just weight the data to the actual percentage of college educated, then the polls look pretty close. Like they look like pretty close to what Trump actually got, or certainly tied. So in 2019, I worked in the Kentucky governor's race, and there was a lot of PTSD because the polls were really wrong. I mean, like really wrong. Like people thought Jack Conway was going to win by 10 points and he lost by 10 points. I mean, I don't think it was that, but it was like really wrong. So I didn't work for the candidate, I worked for an outside group. So I required my sample be 70% without a college education. Just required it. Said, I don't care, if more college educated people are agreeing. And, we got it right, So I think that correction has kind of happened. And I think the 2018 polls have been very accurate.
Right.
Now what we don't know is who's going to turn out to vote. Because what happened in 2018 was a lot of people came out to vote in special elections and primaries who had never voted before.
Right.
And how do you talk to someone who's never voted before?
Yeah, right.
And we're seeing that this year too, that there are primaries where somebody's voting in a Senate primary, and the first time they ever voted was the presidential primary 3 months earlier. And so, the problem now is, who are the chunk of people who haven't voted who are going to vote? Which is a different problem.
Right.
And it's not easy to fix. And, I've had to deal with it in real time when you start seeing some places you can vote by mail and the Secretary of State records it. So you can see in the weeks leading up to the primary who's voting.
Right.
And you can start seeing, wow, I'm comparing this to a like election. And this is way higher than that like election. How do I adjust my sampling frame to find those people? And that's really hard. And that's where pollsters get a bad rap, because people somehow think pollsters can predict the future and predict who's going to vote. And you can to some degree, but if people are going to vote for the first time ever, I'm not sure how you're supposed to find them,
Yeah.
So that'll be our problem this year in 2020 is, not so much do we have the demographics of our sample right, but are we capturing people who didn't vote in 2016?
Yeah. Look, lot I could say there, but let's keep moving. Let's get to our stated. Let's talk down ballot before I open it up. Start questions that have come in as we've been going. Look, Anna, quick readout from you. Look, given the national numbers, I think the smart money would have to say that the Dems are quite likely to retain the House. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think we might pick up seats because there were races that were really close, but we had a candidate, like it was a race that no one ever thought, you had a weak candidate who didn't raise money. And so, you sort of didn't invest in it. And so there's a bunch of seats, particularly in Texas. Texas has got like 3 that potentially could flip. There's a seat in Arizona. So there's not a huge number of reach seats, but they're there. There are places where Democrats who had no money lost by 2 or 3 points. And if they had the money to run a real campaign, or if the party had realized it was competitive and come in and put money into it, they would have won. So I actually think Democrats will pick up some seats, and I don't really see them losing any.
And let's real quickly then, what does it do to the composition of the caucus, in a world in which the Dems keep and if not grow their majority in the House of Reps? Does, one of the big stories of 18, you've already alluded to women candidates doing well. I think perhaps, that energy, the so-called squad type members of the Democratic caucus, perhaps, pulling the caucus, towards the left and really deft political management by Pelosi, and just any reflections on sort of the internal dynamics and the shape of the Democratic caucus politically, ideologically, after the election?
I think that there's no question that there are now more progressive members of Congress than there were before. But I think the media attention to the squad is a bit of a misread, because if you look at the 40 pickups, in other words, the 40 seats that switched from Democrat to Republican, most of them are moderates. Oppose the Green New Deal, oppose Medicare for All. So the progressive caucus grows when progressive candidates win primaries. And you've already seen some of that this year, like Eliot Engel lost in New York, a Democrat who lost to a young progressive candidate, just like, with AOC. So when you have those kinds of primaries, you then kind of, like I said, make the progressive caucus in the House gets bigger. But most of the flips, almost by definition, you have to have a moderate candidate, because you're flipping seats and you're getting some Republican votes and you're getting some independents who voted Republicans before. So there is more progressive energy, but when I look at the seats that might flip, many of them are moderates. Few are very progressive, but most of them are moderates.
Yeah. So, right. Okay. And again,
and by the way, moderate is still pretty darn liberal. That's what's so annoying about the Democratic Party. It's like, who's the liberal and not the liberal, or the progressive? I mean, everyone's really progressive. You know what I mean? It's at the margins. Like, do you think there should be a public option on Medicare that anyone can buy into at an affordable price? Or do you want to have, obviously single payer is a huge thing, but you know what I'm saying? It's like,
got it.
These are really differences at the margin.
Got it. Okay. Hey, and before I open it up, read out on the Senate, for just to remind Australian listeners, the current Senate is 53-47 Republican Democrat. We've got 30 Democratic. We've got 35 senators up. 23 of the races are being defended by Republicans. 12 Dems. So Republicans, there are more Republicans up, right? For a start. In order for the Dems to get to 50, with the vice president then presumably a Democratic vice president, giving them the tie-breaking vote, most people say the Republicans take back Alabama, so that actually put, the sort of the starting point for the Democrats, if you will, is actually a 54-46 Senate. And I'm just wondering, Anna, your sense of the likelihood that there are then 4 pickups, and if so, would you give us Anna Greenberg's tip as to which are the most likely 4 to go, perhaps, or not?
Sure. Well, full disclosure, my firm is working in 4 of those races. I work for Mark Kelly in Arizona and John Hickenlooper in Colorado, and one of my partners works for Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire and Gary Peters in Michigan. I think pre-COVID, I was very skeptical that we could win the Senate, just because, there are places like Maine, for example, where someone like a Susan Collins has a personal relationship with the people in that state. Democrats vote for her, right? So it's just hard to beat candidates that have a real connection to a state that's an authentic relation, it's authentic. But I think COVID's really changed that. And I think that there's, I think first of all, Trump, because of very few people, Republicans, including even Collins and Murkowski, really challenged Trump, that they kind of own it, right? And so they own the success, like the economy booming, not that I think that Trump's responsible for it, but he claimed, but they also own the failure. And he's really an anchor around people's neck. And so I think that places like Georgia, North Carolina, Maine seem more possible. And Antilles, also in North Carolina, has a particular problem in that he was selling his stock after a private briefing that suggested that, that the stock market was going to collapse. Just like Loeffler in Georgia. So I think, we have a good chance of taking back the Senate. I don't want to put a number on it because I don't know. I do think that Colorado and Arizona are the most likely to flip, and I'm not just saying that because I work there. I think that's the conventional wisdom and from the public polling. Yeah. Both Gardner and McSally. Yeah. Gardner has never gotten more than 42% in any public poll, and I don't think McSally's gotten more than, say, 45. So.
Yeah, that'd be our assessment too. We only see the public polling, and if you look at that, Gardner, among Republican Senate incumbents in trouble, he's clearly, I think, the most in trouble. It's a really interesting observation about that personal connection that is sort of being disintermediated by COVID. For typically, what makes Senate races a little more immune from national tides.
Well, historically they have been, but as races become more nationalized, there are fewer and fewer. And what I'm saying is the few that still exist may go down. Collins in particular, she's the one who really has been there a long time and sort of embodied the notion of independence and speaking your mind and main stuff.
Lot we could get into race by race there, but in the interest of time, I'll keep moving. We've got about 17 minutes to go, and it's time to turn to some questions that came in as people either registered or the many questions have shown up as we've been chatting, Anna. And
I'll answer them fast so you can get to a lot of them.
That is wow! I love this idea. See, now it's up to me to ask them fast. So let's see how we. Look, we've already asked about the polls. But I want to go back. Robert Talbot Stern, who joins us from your neck, he's in the University of Pennsylvania. Anna, would you what's the fudge factor to carry around on the polls, given sort of the likely error? If you see a lead, what's your working MOE as a margin of error? If a candidate is up in public polls, say an average of public polls says plus 3, is that enough, or when do you start?
Well, I rely on 538.
Yep. That
shows, for the most part, the bias is 2 or 3 points each cycle. Is that right, Simon?
That's about
right. So that would be my margin of error. So if Biden's up 15, do it. If he's up 3, because I think look, Clinton won by 2 and lost because of the Electoral College, right? So. The conventional wisdom is you have to be up by 8 or 9 presidentially to win the Electoral College. But I think that 538's got a whole analysis. You can go look at it. That the average bias, and usually swings, one way or the other. It's not like there's that average error randomly. Yeah. This probably has a 2 or 3 point Democratic bias, is my guess.
Yeah. And as
because, by the way, because Republicans are less likely to take survey. If your guy's not doing well, you're less likely to want to take that survey. So there are probably fewer Republicans participating in surveys. So I would take whatever it is and say maybe it's 2 points lower.
Okay. And then relatedly, shy Trump voters, do you think it's not just that they're hard to get to take the survey, that people don't want to say to a pollster that they're actually thinking about voting for Trump?
I personally have never looked at the issue, but I feel like every time the Upshot or some other group looks at it, they say there's no evidence of shy Trump voters.
Okay. Let's there's a very specific question about from Jim Orchard, who looks like he's, as a former Colorado resident from 2005 to 2016, I'm interested to know if Anna thinks the state is shifting from purple to blue. And then we've already talked about Corey. But is that state locking in, Anna, I guess is the question.
I think so. I mean, you can't look at the 2018 results where they basically swept the entire state, I mean, and not, by big margins. And, a lot of this is the suburbs around Denver have completely shifted. And not to mention the growing Hispanic population. So, I mean, I got in trouble when I said that I thought Colorado was blue by someone who lived in Colorado. And I was like, okay, sorry. But I kind of think it's shifted blue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of reach seats in the Senate, Anna, that I mean, there are the easy things where we can look at the poll aggregators, and we've talked about Colorado and Arizona. I know you've got, you're working for the Democratic candidates there, but are there any perhaps ones you're working for or not working for that you think, boy, if it's really on, and you go a little higher up the tree, and there might be a surprise. Anything like that? And that comes from Michael Ramos asks that question.
I mean, I think Georgia. The challenge with Georgia is, as you know from 2018, they practice a lot of voter suppression there. So in all likelihood, Stacey Abrams won that governor's race, and she was robbed. So that's an X factor, right? And even if you look at the presidential primary in Georgia this year, you still had lines, people 4 hours in line. Yeah. And the other thing about Georgia is that it's a runoff state. So if you don't get 50%, you have a runoff in December, and runoffs tend to favor Republicans. So that's why I call Georgia reach, because I think there's some structural challenges there. But if you have a true wave, you could win one or both of those seats. And certainly the person who the Republicans want, Kelly Loeffler, is now, she may be beat by Doug Collins, but she's very damaged.
Right.
So,
and Kendall Warren, that answers your question too. Quite a few questions about really wanting to get into some of the nitty gritty, and we might have. Look, this is a good question from Dana Logston. I'm sorry. Above and beyond the question of how we, so I'm gathering.
Seems like there's a lot of Americans on this.
We, that's a Democrat, I'm presuming. We take the House and Senate. Is there a way for Biden to lose this?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's possible for Biden to win and not win the Senate. I don't think it's possible we're winning the Senate and Biden loses. Right. That means we're winning Senate seats in Republican states.
But you're basically saying but the probability that Biden is the next president of the United States is approaching 1.0 in your view.
It's higher than winning the Senate. I mean, you think about it, like, you have to ask people running for Senate to outperform the top of the ticket. And really, it's really hard, in my anecdotal experience, about 5 points. It depends, but about 5 points is like the most you can do. So, it would be very unusual for a candidate to do 5 points higher than the president.
Right. And Dana clarifies that he is a Californian living in Sydney.
Okay.
Dana, great to have you with us.
You're definitely in a better place right now.
Hey, one thing we've got a ton of questions on this, so apologies to no one that I'm singling out in particular. But Anna, is it something your clients are talking with you about, or through the party networks that you're plugged into? But you mentioned voter suppression, but the prospects that we have a free, fair, and peaceful election, the extent to which this is a genuine concern, and in particular, a genuine concern for people such as yourself and your clients who are trying to win this election.
I mean, It's an unprecedented election, you know, to have the President of the United States cast aspersions on fairly conventional and well-regarded ways of voting, including in many states where Republicans have made ample use of the ability to vote early or vote by mail and not in person. So, you know, I'm not going to have any hubris to say that, like, it's no big, I don't know with what, but there's some interesting polling that suggests that now Republicans, and some of my polling too, are less likely to say they'll vote by mail. But of course, if COVID is raging in November, which there's no reason to think it won't be, given that we've done nothing, then, you know, does that hurt Republicans because they are going to, you know, they're going to vote in person? And then, you know, what if they've reduced the number of polling places and you make that hard? So that's one, you know, possible aspect. There definitely will be, you know, efforts at voter suppression. There always are, and I'm sure there'll be more of that. But I guess the question is, like, if people want to vote, for the most part, they'll be able to vote. And Democrats are highly motivated to vote. And they're being educated by the party and by outside groups to vote by mail. Because, you know, the rules are different in every state. And, like, there's people in Texas who are like, I'm going to vote by mail. But you actually have to be 65 years old to vote by mail. So they're not going to be able to vote by mail in Texas unless they're 65 and older. So a lot of education. So I can't answer your question. I think there's a lot of there's countervailing pressures. There's countervailing, which is Republicans not availing themselves of it, which they have in the past. That hurts Republicans. And then the other is suppression of Democrats. And then an effort then to delegitimate the results. I would say I'm encouraged that when Trump a few days ago suggested that maybe we should postpone the election, that almost every Republican said that's not going to happen.
Right.
I'd like to think that there are enough Republicans, if Trump attempts to do that, who would say, you know, no, we're not.
Well, it'd have to get through it'd have to get through a Democratic House too, right? It's federal statute that sets the date.
But yeah, there's no way for him to delay it. I'm saying that he will still try to delegitimate it. And the question is, like, I think we're going to need Republicans to, like, say, no, you have to leave office.
Can you,
you lost.
can you maybe give us a little bit of insight into which these sorts of considerations about protecting people's access to the vote is an active part of something that candidates and perhaps the National Party, it is sort of part of the strategy and part of their operations between that. Have you got any insight on that? And
it absolutely is.
Share with us? Yeah.
It absolutely is. And at every level, it's the parties, it's the candidates. We have a lot of groups that do voter registration and getting out the vote who are, you know, working hard to educate people. So as an example, in Arizona, for example, you can sign up to be on the permanent absentee ballot list, meaning you just get an absentee ballot every election. You don't have to. So there are huge numbers of people getting signed up by the coordinated campaign to go on the PEVL, it's called PEVL, to get on the PEVL list. Mm-hmm. So that's happening all over. And yes, I'm not saying it's going to work, but I can tell you that there's great awareness and a lot of resources going into voter education. Because like I said, you know, if you're in Texas and you're not 65, you can't vote by mail. And so, you know, you got to make sure that if they want to vote, they know they can't do it. And they have to vote early or they have to go in person, you know?
A question from Suzanne Ricard. From here, meaning Australia, I presume, seeing the vigilante cohorts out in towns and cities, armed to the teeth and very, very angry, what does the future hold for any kind of peace returning to American civil society following the election? And I'd say even during the election, actually, Anna.
I can't believe you asked me that question 6 minutes before we end. I have no idea.
Okay. Hey,
I have no idea.
One thing I do want to ask about from our perspective here as a US Studies Center, where the Australian-US relationship and American foreign policy is such core business for us at the moment. The extent to which foreign policy, and perhaps China in particular, is getting a run, so to speak, this election cycle, number one, politically, but perhaps, I know, away from the context of elections, Anna, your sense as a matter of policy, where both sides of American politics might be tracking on this, and indeed the million-dollar question that Australian analysts are asking is, if, as the poll suggests, Biden wins, what does a China policy and the appetite, the political appetite for, prosecuting an expensive military and all cyber and all those other things that countering China might entail. I just some takes from you on that. I know you're not a foreign policy expert per se, but the way it intersects politics and domestic politics and domestic political support for those sorts of quite costly policy initiatives. Your sense of that, Anna?
Well, as you say, I'm not a policy expert. I think broadly speaking, I can assume that Biden will want to restore our role in the sense of being part of alliances, being part of a collective that tries to push back against things that Russia and China, and other places do that hurt, whether it's through hacking and, cybersecurity and patents and trademarks to, currency manipulation. I mean, on all of those issues, or even just to sort of have a balance of military power. Like, I believe that Biden will want to restore that with America working in alliance with other groups. Independently, I think the challenge will be, I think there's a lot of appetite among Americans to be hard on China, including on things like, it's really, people are less concerned about, they're more concerned about China as an economic power than anything else.
Right.
And how do we compete and make sure that we're not overtaken by China? And so I think what'll be harder is that piece, because even though, Trump's tariffs didn't do anything helpful for us and certainly hurt a lot of people, there's a lot of appetite for those tariffs.
Right.
And, it's interesting that it's become a Republican thing, and Obama was sort of, the free trader. And so it kind of changed traditional partisan lines around it.
Yep.
But there's a lot of appetite for dealing with trade in China in a way that, and so that seems really hard to me. And it's not my area of expertise. But I think
when you say, sorry, Anna, when you say hard, what do you mean by that exactly? Hard politically, or?
It's not hard politically to be anti-China,
right?
But it's hard in policy-making terms because,
okay, yeah,
I'm going to go out on a limb here, but because, the kinds of tariffs that Trump imposed hurt the U.S. economy.
Got it.
So, but there's an appetite for tariffs and for economic punishment for China. So how do you do something that manages/punishes China that doesn't hurt the U.S.? That's hard.
Well, Australia would say it's not hard. We've got these great multilateral fora waiting for the US to rejoin and play a leadership role. Okay. And we talked about the TPP when you were out here, and we're almost out of time, so we won't go there. Last question, Anna. This is something that is a bit of a water cooler. We have water coolers in Australia still, kind of. Bit of a water cooler conversation at the moment, and that is there a scenario where Trump doesn't run? The James
some
Carville.
People's thinking.
Yes. What do you think?
No.
Okay.
Gosh, first of all, I don't know, because it seems so inconceivable given his narcissism that he would just sort of take his ball and go home. And I think right now his strategy is to try to delegitimate the election, so that even if he loses and actually leaves office, he will say that China rigged the election against him.
Got it. And
there'll be a large swath of voters who will believe the election was rigged against them. And so the question is, does that die out? Does it further undermine democratic norms? But he will say China rigged this election against him. There's no question in my mind.
Right. And so, right. Got it. Well, look, that's the top of the hour. That's 60 minutes, and you get your evening back now. Thank you so much, Anna. And thanks to everybody.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. This mode of interacting, it's a mixed blessing. Getting an hour of your time would ordinarily mean flying you across the world, a very costly undertaking for all of us. But one thing we've been doing at the Center is turning adversity into a bit of an opportunity. And Anna, thanks for another fantastic hour for the United States Study Center.
It's my pleasure, and it's really nice to see your face.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, Anna. I hope to see you in DC again when all this craziness settles down.
Maybe in 2 years.
When Australians are able to travel, or
right, when people will come back to our country again.
or we would welcome you here.
Exactly.
Before I close out, thanks to the team on the back end in Sydney, Janine and Mara, another great job by our events team, keeping me to time and the questions coming. And what I want to do is tease Friday. That's our monthly chat that I have with Gordon Flake on, again, another take on US politics as we head into less than 90 days towards this election coming up pretty soon, that 90-day benchmark coming up. And our special guest on Friday will be Dr. Evelyn Farkas, an old colleague of Gordon's, a longtime friend and colleague of Gordon's, and will be joining us again from the United States. But until Friday, and note the time there, that's a 1 o'clock event, Sydney time. We'll see you then. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Anna. Bye, everybody.